David paced the dimly lit apartment, his fingers trembling as he stared at the pile of unpaid bills on the table. The rent was overdue. The electricity was about to be cut off, and his once thriving business was on the verge of collapse. His wife, Naomi, sat on their worn-out couch, her soft eyes filled with concern. "David, talk to me. You haven't eaten all day," she said, her voice gentle but firm. He clenched his jaw. "What's there to talk about? We're drowning, Naomi. I don't know how much longer we can survive like this." Naomi reached out, placing her hand on his. "We'll find a way. We always do." But David wasn't sure this time. His debts had grown beyond his control. No bank would lend him another cent. And then, there was the offer, the unthinkable, unspeakable offer that had been haunting his mind all day. It had come from none other than Raymond Sinclair, a billionaire known for his ruthless business empire and his eerie, commanding presence. David had met him once at a casino, a place he never should have stepped into but had in a moment of reckless desperation. Raymond had watched him lose his last bit of savings at the poker table before calling him over.
"You need money," Raymond had said, swirling his glass of whiskey. "I can give you more than you've ever dreamed of. But everything has a price." David had scoffed at first. And what price would that be? Raymond had smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent chills down David's spine. "Your wife. Just one night." David had frozen, his breath caught in his throat. "You're insane." But the billionaire had merely slid a blank check across the table. "Think about it. You could start over, be free of debt, give her the life she deserves." Now, standing in his crumbling apartment, David felt the weight of that moment pressing down on him. Was it truly insane? Or was it an opportunity? Naomi deserved better than this life of struggle. He deserved better, but at what cost? David took a deep breath. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. She looked up at him, concern deepening in her eyes. "What is it?" And then, against every moral fiber in his being, he said the words that would change their lives forever. "I have a way to fix everything. But you won't like it." Naomi's forehead creased. "What do you mean?" David swallowed hard. He could still walk away from this, still pretend he never considered it. But the thought of living like this, barely scraping by, watching his wife suffer because of his failures, made his chest tighten. He hesitated, then whispered, "Raymond Sinclair offered me money. A lot of money." Naomi's lips parted slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Raymond Sinclair? The billionaire?" David nodded. He could barely meet her gaze. Naomi steadied him. "And what does he want in return?" David inhaled sharply, his stomach twisting. "One night? With you." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Naomi's eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then, she let out a shaky laugh, as if waiting for him to say it was a joke. But his face told her it wasn't. Her laughter died. "David, tell me you're not serious." "I didn't say yes," he said quickly. I wanted to talk to you." Naomi shot up from the couch, her body trembling. "You thought about it?" Her voice cracked. "David, do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to." She cut herself off, unable to say the words. "I don't want to ask you this," David said desperately, stepping toward her. "But Naomi, we're out of options. We can barely eat. Our electricity is getting cut off tomorrow. And he's offering enough to change everything, to start fresh. No more struggle, no more debt." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "At what cost, David?" David ran his fingers through his hair, feeling like he was unraveling. "Just one night," he whispered. "It's just one night. And we never have to speak of it again." Naomi's lip trembled. "Is that what you really believe? That this will just go away?" David exhaled shakily. But before he could answer, Naomi turned away, hugging herself as if trying to shield her own body from the weight of his words. For the first time, David saw the fracture, the deep, irreparable crack forming between them. But then, after what felt like an eternity, Naomi whispered, "How much?" David's heart clenched. 10 million. Naomi let out a breath, shaky and uneven. And if I say no? David's throat tightened. He had promised himself he would never pressure her, but desperation had turned him into someone he didn't recognize. Then we lose everything. Naomi closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something in her gaze had shifted. A quiet, haunting emptiness. Set the meeting, she murmured, before turning and walking away. David watched her disappear into the bedroom, his chest aching with a pain he couldn't name. He had won, and yet, he had never felt more like a man who had just lost everything. David sat in the sleek black limousine, his fingers gripping his knees so tightly they ached. Beside him, Naomi was silent, staring blankly out the window. She hadn't spoken much since agreeing to the deal. She hadn't touched him either. The car rolled to a stop in front of an opulent mansion, larger than anything David had ever seen. The towering gates opened slowly, as if swallowing them whole. Raymond Sinclair was waiting at the entrance, dressed in a crisp black suit, a glass of wine in hand. His smile was slow, calculating. David, Naomi. He nodded in greeting. Right on time. David forced himself to stand tall, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to grab Naomi's hand and run. But where would they run to? Back to their debt? Their poverty? Naomi stepped forward before he could say anything. Let's get this over with. Raymond's eyes gleamed with amusement as he extended a hand. Naomi hesitated for the briefest moment before placing her palm in his. David felt something inside him crack as Raymond led her through the grand doors. Wait, David choked out. Naomi turned slightly, her face unreadable. David swallowed hard. I love you. For a second, he thought he saw her lip tremble. But then, she turned away, disappearing into the mansion's lavish interior. The doors shut behind her. David was left standing alone, feeling the weight of what he had done. One night. Just one night. So why did it feel like he had already lost her forever? David sat in the limousine, staring at the mansion's towering gates, feeling as if he were suffocating, his fists clenched against his knees, his mind a whirlwind of regret, fear, and something else, something darker. What was happening behind those walls? Was Naomi okay? Had she changed her mind? He had told himself this was just business, just survival. But now, as the reality of what he had done settled into his bones, he felt like he had made a deal with the devil himself. The driver cleared his throat. Sir, do you want to leave? David blinked. Leave? Was he supposed to go home? Sleep peacefully while his wife was in there? The thought made him sick. No, he said hoarsely. I'll wait. The driver nodded and remained silent. Hours passed. David's mind tormented him with images Naomi in Raymond's arms, his lips on her skin, her soft voice whispering things she had only ever whispered to him. He pressed his fingers to his temples, trying to push the thoughts away. He trusted Naomi. But what did trust even mean in a situation like this? A single night, $10 million. But at what cost? Then, suddenly movement. The mansion doors swung open. Naomi emerged. David's breath caught in his throat. She was still wearing the elegant black dress she had left in, but something was different. Her face was unreadable, her posture unnervingly poised. There was no relief, no exhaustion, just an eerie stillness that made David's chest tighten. Raymond followed behind her, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. His eyes flickered to David, as if assessing him, as if owning him. Naomi walked straight to the car. She slid into the seat beside David, but she didn't look at him. Raymond leaned down at the open window. A pleasure doing business with you. His voice dripped with amusement, as if he knew something David didn't. David wanted to punch him. Instead, he muttered, "We're done here." Raymond only smiled. "Are we?" Before David could reply, the car pulled away, leaving the mansion behind. He turned to Naomi, his throat dry. "Are you okay?" For the first time that night, she met his eyes. David's stomach twisted. Something had changed, but Naomi only gave a small, chilling smile and whispered, "Let's go home." And just like that, David knew this night would haunt them forever. The drive home was silent. Naomi sat beside David, her face unreadable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't shed a tear. She hadn't asked any questions. She hadn't even looked at him since whispering those eerie words, "Let's go home." David stole glances at her, his chest tightening. He had expected her to be angry, to cry, to yell at him, curse him, tell him she hated him. But this silence, this unnatural calm, terrified him. When they arrived at their apartment, Naomi walked inside without hesitation. David followed, heart pounding. "Naomi," he said softly as he shut the door behind them. "Talk to me." She set her purse down carefully, as if everything were perfectly normal. Then she turned to face him. "What do you want me to say?" David swallowed. I don't know anything." Naomi studied him, then gave a small smile. "It's over. Isn't that what you wanted?" The way she said it so detached, so cold, sent a chill through him. David took a step closer. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. His chest tightened. "Naomi, I'm tired, David." She turned away, walking toward the bedroom. "Good night." And just like that, she was gone. David stood frozen, staring at the empty hallway. Something was very, very wrong. David barely slept that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind drowning in thoughts. Naomi was just a few feet away, but she felt farther than she ever had. He had expected her to cry herself to sleep, to flinch if he touched her, to show some sign of pain. But she hadn't. She was too calm, too composed, like something inside her had died. Morning came, but the weight in David's chest remained. He found Naomi in the kitchen, making coffee like it was any other day. "Good morning," she said, her voice light, almost cheerful. David frowned. "Morning." She poured 2 cups, setting one in front of him. "Did you sleep well?" The casualness of her words sent a fresh wave of unease through him. "No," he admitted, watching her closely. "Did you?" She took a sip of coffee, then met his gaze. Her expression was unreadable. "I did." Lies. David studied her, searching for something, anything that would tell him what she was thinking. But there was nothing. Just a polite smile and empty eyes. The woman sitting in front of him looked like Naomi, sounded like Naomi. But something had shifted. And then, as if sensing his thoughts, Naomi reached across the table, placing a hand over his. "David," she murmured, "it's over now. Let's not talk about it." His fingers tensed beneath hers. She was asking him to move on, to pretend nothing had happened. But how could he, when every part of him was screaming that something was terribly wrong? He wanted to ask what Raymond had done to her. He wanted to demand why she was acting like this. But Naomi was already pulling her hand away, standing up. "I'm going out for a bit," she said. "I need some air." David's stomach twisted. "Do you want me to come with you?" Her smile was soft. "No." And then, just like that, she was gone. David sat there, gripping his coffee cup, a terrifying thought creeping into his mind. He had sold Naomi for one night, but what if he had lost her forever? David sat at the kitchen table long after Naomi had left, his coffee growing cold. His mind churned with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Where had she gone? Why was she acting like this? He had expected her to be distant, but not like this. Not this eerie calm, this detachment. Hours passed. David tried calling her, but she didn't answer. Tried again. Voicemail. By the time the sun began to set, his nerves were raw. And then finally the sound of the front door unlocking. David shot to his feet as Naomi stepped inside, carrying a shopping bag. "You were gone all day," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was worried." Naomi smiled lightly, setting the bag on the counter. "I just needed some space." David's fists clenched. "Naomi, talk to me. Where did you go?" She let out a soft sigh, turning to face him. "I walked around the city, went to a spa, cleared my head." "A spa? Since when did Naomi go to spas?" David searched her face. "Why won't you tell me what's wrong?" Her expression didn't change. "Nothing is wrong, David." The lie was so effortless. It made his stomach turn. He stepped closer, voice tightening. "Did something happen with Raymond?" At the mention of the billionaire's name, something flickered in Naomi's eyes, so quick, so faint, that David almost missed it. Then, just as fast, it was gone. She reached into the shopping bag, pulling out a sleek black phone box. "I bought a new phone," she said, changing the subject. "I needed one." David blinked. "What?" She shrugged. "My old one was outdated." David's skin prickled. Naomi had never cared about expensive things before. They had always been careful with money. But now she was spending without hesitation. and worse, she had bought it with money from Raymond Sinclair. David's chest tightened. Naomi, is there something you're not telling me? She met his gaze, calm as ever. No. And for the first time, David felt it a wall between them. Something had changed in Naomi that night, and he was beginning to fear he would never get her back. David had a sickening feeling that he already knew why. One evening, he finally confronted her. Naomi, who have you been talking to? He asked as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even flinch. What are you talking about? David clenched his jaw. You're always on your phone. You disappear for hours. You don't even look at me anymore. Naomi sighed and set her phone aside. David, please, not this again. Yes, this again. His voice cracked with frustration. I need to know the truth. Are you still seeing him? The room fell into an eerie silence. Naomi's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked bored. I told you, she said calmly. It was one night. David took a step closer, his chest tightening. Then why does it feel like I lost you? Naomi met his gaze, and for the first time in days, really looked at him. You did. David's heart stopped. A hollow chuckle escaped him. So that's it? You're in love with him now? Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know what I feel. The words hit David harder than a slap. He staggered back, running a hand through his hair. So what does that mean? You're leaving? Naomi didn't answer. You don't even look at me anymore. She simply picked up her phone again. David's stomach twisted. Raymond Sinclair hadn't just taken Naomi for one night. He had stolen her from him completely. And David had been the one who handed her over. David felt the walls of their home closing in, suffocating him. He had fought for years to build a life with Naomi. But now, in just one night, everything had unraveled. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Naomi packed a small bag. Where are you going? His voice was hoarse. Naomi zipped up the bag and turned to face him. I need space, David. Space? He let out a bitter laugh. From me? Or to be with him? Her expression remained calm, detached. I don't know. David clenched his fists. I gave you to him for one night. That was the deal. Not forever. Naomi flinched. Just slightly. You think it's that simple? David shot up from the bed, his emotions unraveling. I thought it was survival. I thought it was us against the world. But you're acting like you don't even care. Naomi's eyes darkened. Do you want to know the truth, David? She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. That night changed me. David's breathing grew unsteady. Changed you how? Naomi's lips trembled, but she steadied herself. I don't know if I can love you the same way anymore. The words hit like a knife to the chest. David felt himself sinking. Naomi, she swallowed hard, looking away. I don't know what I feel for Raymond. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just curiosity. Or maybe it's more. David's vision blurred. And what about us? A long silence. Then, Naomi whispered, I don't know if we can ever go back. David felt his entire world collapse. His hands trembled as he reached for her. Please, we can fix this. Naomi hesitated. For a moment, David thought she might stay. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. David didn't stop her. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew Naomi wasn't just leaving for space. She was leaving for him, and David had no one to blame but himself. But then, she pulled away. I need time, she murmured. David stood in the doorway, his hand gripping the frame as Naomi walked out. Each step she took felt like a wound opening deeper in his chest. The sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway was the loudest thing in the silence of the apartment. His mind raced, replaying every moment the choice he made to sell her, the promises he made, the hope that it would be temporary, that things would go back to normal. But now, with Naomi slipping through his fingers like sand, he realized how wrong he had been. He collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. The weight of his own decisions crushed him. The night they had agreed to the deal with Raymond Sinclair had seemed like the only way out of their desperate financial situation. $10 million was too much to pass up. But now, as the echo of Naomi's departure reverberated in his mind, he realized he had paid a price for higher than money could ever fix. Naomi wasn't just gone physically, she was gone from him emotionally. That much was clear. He could see it in her eyes, and the way she looked at him like a stranger. The warmth that had once lit up her face when she looked at him was replaced by something hollow, something distant. David's phone buzzed, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. He picked it up, but when he saw the name on the screen, his heart sank. It was Raymond. He didn't want to answer, but somehow his fingers moved on their own. David. Raymond's smooth voice came through, cold and indifferent. I hope everything went as planned. David's grip on the phone tightened. You took her from me, Raymond. And now, you've broken yourself. The line went dead. David stared at his phone, his thoughts in turmoil. His hands were shaking. His breath came in ragged gasps. Raymond was right. Naomi wasn't coming back. She wasn't the woman he married anymore. David, the moment you decided to sell her, you broke her. You can't fix what's broken. The weight of his own guilt suffocating him. He had sold the one thing that mattered most to him. And in doing so, he had destroyed the life he had tried so hard to protect. He stumbled to the window, staring out at the city lights. Everything looked so distant, so cold. His reflection stared back at him, broken, empty. Naomi was out there somewhere. He had sacrificed everything for money, and in the end, it wasn't enough. The price of betrayal was far steeper than he could ever have imagined. And now, there was no turning back. And the woman she had once been would never return. David sank to his knees. His heart was shattered, his world broken. The tears coming without warning, streaming down his face. She had gone, and so had his chance at redemption.